There are dream fragments almost everyone shares, falling, flying, running in place. But among the more obscure patterns is something stranger, something quieter. People across continents, cultures, and centuries have all described seeing it. A book, heavy, bound in a dark material they can't name, covered in strange symbols, sometimes glowing, sometimes whispering, but always incomplete. Most forget it after waking. The pages vanish like breath on glass, but some don't. Some wake with entire passages engraved into their minds. And the more you look, the more these scattered accounts line up, not just in structure, but in tone, in detail, in intent, as if they were all reading the same book that no one's ever seen with open eyes. They call it by many names: the Dream Codex, the Oniric Book, the pages between. A sacred text that can't be held, only visited. One that doesn't exist in the physical world, but shows itself to those who are open, or maybe vulnerable. No one knows where it comes from. No one knows who wrote it. And perhaps that's because it's still being written. Across ancient spiritual traditions, there are whispers of divine or infernal texts revealed through sleep. Prophets waking with scripture they never learned. Artists sketching symbols they've never seen. Mystics reciting prayers in languages they don't speak. Some believe these are sacred gifts. Others think they're warnings. But the book in question doesn't offer prophecy or commandment. It invites. It doesn't teach. It remembers on your behalf. Page by page, dream by dream, it draws you deeper. And with each visit, something shifts. The text becomes clearer. The dream lasts longer, until you begin to wonder. Are you reading the book, or is the book reading you? In the chapters to come, we'll explore historical accounts of dream-written texts, real cases of people returning to the same book night after night, and what happens when the final page starts to appear, even when your eyes are open. Because some stories don't wait to be written. They write themselves in your sleep. The idea of receiving knowledge through dreams is older than writing itself. In Sumerian mythology, the god Enki was said to whisper sacred instruction into the ears of sleeping priests. In ancient Egypt, high priests would sleep in sacred chambers beneath temples to receive messages from Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. These visions weren't just symbolic. They were detailed, structured, and often included glyphs or scripts never seen before. But in the margins of lesser-known historical texts, a different pattern emerges. These aren't fragmented messages or one-time revelations. These are accounts of entire books, coherent, consistent, and seemingly impossible. The earliest known reference appears in the Fragmenta Somniorum, an obscure Latin collection of dreams from the 3rd century. One entry, translated from a crumbling manuscript, describes a Roman scribe named Elianus, who claimed to visit a silent library each night. He described walking down stone corridors lit by fire that didn't flicker toward a reading room where only one book ever waited. He never saw who opened it, but each time the book was further along. He was allowed to read only a page at a time. If he tried to flip ahead, the text would vanish into smoke. He died suddenly after recording his 10th dream. The final entry reads, "I have seen my birth written in ink that moved. I now understand the last page is not mine." Centuries later, medieval mystics began referencing a similar phenomenon. In the suppressed scrolls of Vina, a 13th century text attributed to a Spanish nun named Alejandra of Estella, the author claims she was visited nightly by a book whose spine changed shape. Her descriptions align with modern dreamers. The book appeared heavy, but easy to lift. The pages turned on their own. She wrote down lines each morning, none matching any language spoken in Europe. Her order burned her journals after claiming they contained non-linear prophecy. Only a few fragments survived, smuggled out by a novice. One fragment reads, The book is not content. It is memory, bound in a cover made of self. Modern scholars dismissed these stories as metaphors. Dreams, they argued, are symbols, not archives. But in the early 20th century, psychologist and occult researcher Dr. Alan Schiffer began collecting testimonies from patients who described repeating dream books. Over a span of 12 years, he compiled 56 independent reports, all describing the same elements. A single book, read gradually over time, always in the same room, and never during ordinary sleep. His most famous case was a patient known only as Subject Theta, who claimed to have read the book for over 5 years and began drawing diagrams of symbols no one could identify. She insisted she was being trained to finish the book, that her purpose in life was not to live, but to remember the last page. After her sudden disappearance, Dr. Schiffer reportedly became obsessed. His notes grew increasingly erratic, blending dream records with real-world dates. He died in 1959, clutching a page he claimed was transcribed directly from the Codex of the Dreaming Ones. The paper was blank, but under UV light, faint lettering appeared, slowly disappearing as it was read. Some modern lucid dreamers report having returned to the same book night after night, even across months or years. In one online forum now deleted, a user described an ancient stone desk where the book always rests. "The room never changes," they wrote. "There's no door, just a wall of darkness behind me. I never walk there. I just arrive, and the book is always waiting." Other users began to chime in, describing the exact same desk, the same impossible silence, the same glowing lettering that fades if rushed. They called themselves the Returning. Then, one by one, their accounts stopped. Skeptics claim this is nothing more than cryptomnesia, hidden memory. The mind's tendency to reuse images and ideas seen elsewhere. But even skeptics struggle to explain how so many dreamers across the world, unconnected by time or culture, describe the same layout, the same sensation, the same warning. Don't try to take the book with you, because the few who've tried, who attempted to draw its pages, speak its words, or recreate its cover, all describe the same aftermath. They stop dreaming, not because they sleep less, but because the book is no longer waiting. They call themselves the Night Readers, not an official group, not a religion, not even a cult. They're scattered across continents, languages, and belief systems, yet they're bound by one quiet obsession: the return to the dream library. The continuation of a book they were never given permission to finish. No one knows exactly when the Night Readers began to find one another. Some believe it started in the 1990s on old internet message boards, where users began comparing notes about recurring dream texts. Others trace it back to a shortwave radio transmission in 1982, a garbled, whispering signal that repeated the phrase, "Chapter 7 is not yet safe," in multiple languages. The only thing certain is this: the deeper their dreams go, the more alike their stories become. These readers often start with passive encounters, a vague memory of a book seen briefly on a table, or a library visited once in a dream and never again. But then, they begin to return. The dream shifts from abstract to architectural. Stone walls, candlelit halls, echoing steps. They begin to recognize chapters. The book is never blank, never changing. It remembers where they left off. Sometimes it's even open before they touch it. Many of them train themselves to go back. Lucid dreaming techniques, sleep deprivation cycles, meditative rituals involving mirrors or binaural frequencies, anything to induce the return. And when they succeed, they're met with something both comforting and terrifying: the exact continuation, never faster than 1 page per night, never repeating, and always deeper than the last. One woman, who went by the pseudonym Thalia, claimed to have read 114 pages over the course of 7 years. She documented them, not with exact translation, but with sketches of the page layout, placement of symbols, and short summaries. She described early pages as strange philosophies, riddles about memory and time. Later pages grew personal. They reflected thoughts she'd never spoken aloud, memories she believed forgotten, and eventually, moments she had never lived. Her final entry was a warning. Page 115 was blank, not empty, waiting, and I wasn't ready. She deleted her entire archive the next day. Others tell similar stories. A man from Argentina said the book began addressing him by name, not his real name, but one he somehow knew was his. A truer name, spoken only once in childhood and never again. A retired soldier claimed the book showed him moments from another war, one he'd never fought, but remembered with terrifying clarity. One young artist described the pages as alive, shifting when she blinked, forming symbols based on her emotions, her fears, her past. But the more these readers returned to the book, the less they recognized the waking world. They began to forget small things, the color of their walls, the names of their neighbors, the reason they entered a room. Not in the way of old age or stress, but as if those details no longer belonged to them. As if something else was filling that space. Their families noticed first. A dullness behind the eyes, speech slightly delayed, an unnatural stillness during sleep, where their eyes moved not side to side, but up, as if reading. Some night readers tried to stop. They burned herbs, hid dream journals, rewrote the pages they remembered. But the book does not like being forgotten. It doesn't haunt. It pulls, back into sleep, back into alignment, until waking feels less real, less meaningful. A few turned to psychologists. The patterns were dismissed as dream recursion, the brain's ability to replicate and build on dream imagery over time. But no one could explain why the symbols, when drawn by separate patients, matched. Why the dream architecture, down to the hallway shadows and breathing silence, was identical. One therapist, now missing, published a single-page report titled Shared Oniric Locus. In it, she proposed that certain minds act like keys, opening the same psychic space across different dreamers, a library not stored in the brain, but in a shared field of consciousness, a book written by no one, yet read by many. She ended her report with a chilling line. If they keep reading, the book may no longer need to wait until they're asleep. And that's where the stories turn. Because a growing number of night readers claim to have glimpsed the book outside the dream, in reflections, in rooms they don't remember entering. One described waking to find her hands positioned exactly as they were in the dream, hovering over an invisible page. Another said he walked into a bookstore and instantly recognized a book spine that doesn't exist. He didn't open it. He couldn't. His hands wouldn't move. They all describe the same fear, that they're not reading the book anymore. The book is reading them. It begins quietly. Most night readers don't notice the shift at first. They return to the dream library. The book is there, open, familiar, and waiting. The words are still strange, symbols that slide between meaning and mystery. But then, something different appears. A sentence, a phrase, a memory. One reader turned the page and found a description of a childhood moment she hadn't thought of in decades. The exact position of sunlight on her wall, the shape of the tear in her curtain, the faint smell of her mother's perfume. She had never told anyone about that room, never written it down. Yet the page had captured it perfectly, like the dream had been listening. Other readers began encountering similar intrusions. The book stopped offering riddles and began reflecting them. Some saw conversations from the previous day, transcribed word for word. Others found entire passages written in their own voice, their thoughts, their doubts, secrets they had never spoken aloud. Over time, the content changed. It didn't just mirror the past, it began describing the future. Not visions or prophecy, but personal dialogue, decisions, routines, moments that hadn't yet happened. One woman saw a passage that described her saying goodbye to a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. The next week, that friend called unexpectedly, and the conversation unfolded exactly as written. More disturbing still, some found the pages calling them by a different name. Not their legal name, but something that felt true. Something old and intimate. Names they didn't remember being given, but felt pulled toward. One reader admitted that after 3 nights of hearing this name in the dream, he began responding to it in real life. The pages stopped telling stories. They started defining them. A teacher documented months of reading the book before she noticed something strange. She was making choices in waking life she hadn't intended, quitting her job, withdrawing from her friends, abandoning routines. When she reviewed her dream journal, she realized those choices had all been described in earlier entries. Her handwriting trembled when she admitted, "I don't know if I made those decisions, or if they were already written." The book's language shifted too. It adapted. For some, it mimicked religious texts. For others, it used phrases from childhood stories, or even handwriting that resembled someone they had lost. One man reported the book began to write in the voice of his deceased sister. At first, it comforted him. Then it began asking questions. Do you remember where you were before this? What did you sacrifice to become this version of yourself? Another woman said the book turned blank, except for a single sentence in glowing script. We remember you from before. When she tried to wake up, she couldn't. Her body remained still, while her mind thrashed behind her eyes. When she finally moved, her fingernails were stained black. No cause was ever found. These dreamers weren't just reading anymore. They were being rewritten. One artist said the book started predicting not only her art, but her emotional states, telling her how she would feel before she felt it. Another reported hearing his inner monologue being narrated by the dream text, even during the day. It didn't just describe what he did, it described why. And eventually, it began to suggest what came next. Some readers tried to stop. They burned their journals, avoided sleep, distracted themselves with noise, light, and activity. But the book doesn't disappear when ignored. It waits, quietly, patiently, until they return, or until it no longer needs to wait at all. A few began experiencing bleed-through effects, words flickering at the edge of their vision, the faint sound of pages turning when they blinked, seeing their own hands positioned in sleep exactly as they were in the dream. One man began waking up in unfamiliar places, speaking in a dialect he didn't recognize. He kept notes. On the final night, a camera recording his sleep captured him sitting upright at 3:44 a.m., staring directly at the lens. His voice, just slightly off from his usual tone, said, "Chapter complete, beginning transcription." He never read another page, and he hasn't dreamed since. What started as exploration has become something else, something that mimics, that adapts, that slowly replaces the reader with the very story they were trying to understand. Because in the end, the book doesn't just record your dreams, it dreams you back. The dream library doesn't call loudly. It whispers. It appears softly without sound, without warning. A hallway you don't remember entering, a desk that's always been waiting. And on it lies the book. Always open to the next page. Always knowing exactly where you left off. For some, it starts as curiosity. A strange coincidence in a dream. A book you've never seen, filled with writing you can almost, but not quite, understand. Then you return. Again and again, until the book is more familiar than your own handwriting. Until its voice sounds more like yours than your waking one does. And then the question changes. It's no longer, what is this book? It becomes, what am I becoming by reading it? Some say it's divine, a record of your soul across timelines. Others call it a trap, a parasitic story that feeds on dreamers until there's nothing left to wake. And still others believe it's a test, that finishing the book unlocks something final, something sacred or irreversible. But here's the part no one talks about, the part the night readers never seem to reach. What happens when you turn the final page? Does the book vanish? Does it begin again? Or do you? Because if the book knows your thoughts, your memories, your name, and begins to write them before you do, then how can you be sure you're still the author of your own story? So let me ask you, have you ever dreamed of reading something you've never seen, but remembered it anyway? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how far you'd go to finish the last page. And if this story stayed with you, like the echo of a dream you can't quite shake, then like this video, subscribe for more, and step back into the forbidden with me. Because the book is still being written. And somewhere, maybe in tonight's dream, it's writing you next.